It's Bellisario.
Everybody, I am pleased to welcome Jeff Bellisario, uh, who makes me think of Joe D'Alessandro, if you remember Joe, the uh, Visit San Francisco. Great to have you here. His organization, the Bay Area Council, is one of great legend in the Bay Area. They've done a lot of great work. A longtime friend of mine, Jim Wonderman's involved for a long time as well. And now they have a study that focuses on, and I'll pull it up here, the Oakland or Oakland economy and public safety situation is called "Making Oakland Safe and Its Economy Strong: A Vision for Lasting Change." It's a good 58-page read for Oaklanders. I highly suggest that you get it, or you can go to zinnereport.com and type Oakland economy study, and it'll pop up in the search results. But congratulations on it. First of all, what led? What was the aha moment where you all at the Bay Area Council said, you know what, we've got to do this study? How did that happen?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. So the study really came out of the council's relatively new work in public safety around the region. Historically, the Bay Area Council focuses on things like housing and transportation and workforce development, these very long-term issues we think are foundational to the region's economic success. But back in 2020, 2021, when we started to see crime trends going up across the region, our employer members came to us and said, you really got to do something about public safety region-wide, right? Public safety, feeling safe, going out and shopping, getting to an office, moving about the region, like that's just a baseline thing we need within the Bay Area. And then basically a year after that, in 2022, as crime numbers continue to escalate within the city of Oakland, our members came to us and said, Oakland is really, it's the key to the East Bay economy. It's one of the three largest cities in the entire region. If we have a what they deem to be potentially a weak pillar, right, on the safety front, we can't really achieve regional safety without having a safe and crime-free downtown Oakland at the very least. So that was really the impetus for the report, was our members coming to us and saying, you really need to take a look at this issue, get more active in the city. And then often at the Bay Area Council, what we do, my group at the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, which is the think tank, will write a report that is very data-driven, foundational in terms of understanding an issue, and then we make policy recommendations that the Bay Area Council's policy side can then go advance within the city itself. So that's where it all started. And I think as we started on this research, this is not the first time Oakland's been in a budget crisis and had crime going up in the city, right? Or crime not feeling great perception-wise for many residents and folks in the East Bay. Our view was that in order to really have a lasting change, the equation needs to be flipped, right? We need to stop talking about how do we surgically cut from public safety and other places just to balance the budget, right? The equation should be, how do we create a safe ecosystem so that people can spend, businesses can invest, and over time that creates a more sustainable budget and fiscal situation for the city. So that's the flip here, and that's really what we tried to accomplish within this work.
When people read the study, what do you want them to come away with?
I think it's the fact that Oakland has, and I think people, particularly Oaklanders, know this, right? There are unique challenges within the city of Oakland, right? There's a budget challenge. There's a challenge of the negotiated settlement agreement, which comes out of 20 plus years of federal oversight, a lack of trust in the police department. And then there's a relatively new, voters put in place a governance structure that creates even greater police accountability. So I think when we put this out, the aha moment for us, and that we hope readers also see, is that there are so many things that are restricting, particularly OPD and the police department's ability to do their job in the city. So that's part of that's funding, part of that's the federal oversight, part of that's just the accountability structures in the city. And we compare and contrast that with other places around the country. And I think really the top takeaway for us is just the number of police officers, whether it's on a per capita basis or a per crime basis. are just not enough to address the situation in Oakland that we face today. And we're clear that progress was made in 2024, right? There's a number of things the city did, the state did with the CHP deployment, private partners have done making investments in downtown. All of those were useful in driving the crime numbers down, and perception has improved slightly. But if you look overall, crime numbers are still historically high in Oakland. They're high compared to peer cities. The polling that we did shows people still not feeling safe. So I think that the message is we're making progress. We even know what works to a certain extent. It's just a matter of continuing to invest in those things that work across the entire city.
And so I'm going to go through the report itself, and we'll start logically with a table of contents and give people a feel for what areas are covered, and we can go from there. And so as I go back to, boom, there we are, and switch here. There. I'm going to enlarge this a bit for eye consideration. I'll zoom in. That's better. And then one more time. There. So we have introduction, of course, public safety trends in Oakland, comparative crime statistics in mid-cities, how Oakland's budget structure threatens public safety dollars, how crime threatens Oakland economy budget, and Oakland's public safety challenges. Let's let those, be the notepad for how we discuss. So let's talk about public safety trends in Oakland. We technically already did our introduction, but what are some of those trends as you see them?
Well, I think it's and again, pointing out that progress has been made. I think, if you're following the press releases that come out of the mayor's office, you're following the city council, 2024 was an improved year for public safety stats within the city on a reported crime basis, right? So you could argue that many crimes go unreported and this is not the best data in the world. But when you look at those numbers, the violent crime rate in Oakland is still higher than it was 20 to 25 years ago as of 2024. While property crime rates are down, when you look at property crime across the U.S. in mid-sized cities, Oakland is still really second worst on that list, Oakland and Memphis, and it's not really close when you look at a list of 10 or 13 other cities. Oakland does have a much higher property crime rate, even after improvements in 2024. So I think that's one of our key takeaways is that the narrative in Oakland is one of improvement, but the improvement is only getting you to a spot that's still not high on the list of safest cities in America. And I think that's where you'd like Oakland to go, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen even in the next couple of years, given where the city is today. But if the narrative around Oakland can shift from this is one of the least safe cities in the U.S. to this is one of the safest places, that I think for us is a long-term success here. I think the other piece, and I think powerful charts within the document are looking at crime rates compared to other cities and to San Francisco and San Jose. So you might think that crime is really a regional occurrence right across our region. But if you look at crime rates in San Francisco and San Jose today, they're much lower than they are versus the city of Oakland. So these type of comparative stats, I think, are really interesting and help us think through just the scale and scope of the issue within the city.
And I'm curious, we're talking about basically these trends. Here is one that I think is notable to frame for our discussion. This is Oakland Police Department citywide reported violent crime. And of course, this goes back to 1986, and where this area that I'm circling here was the area of where Oakland became known as an attractive place for the growth of gangs. We had a reduction in the leading into the 21st century and then through the 21st century. And then starting in 2006, 7, 8, 9, we had a notable increase, a decrease in 2014 by a bit, and stable but high, even during the pandemic, of course, here, rising. And then, of course, 2023, we went back to 2014 levels, and now 2004 in terms of annual number of reported violent crimes. But then you go on to property crimes, and the reported property crimes are, to me, the most alarming. Let's talk about that because we've always talked about violent crimes in Oakland,
Mhm.
but property crimes um, have been, well, historically, from my recollection, not marked by something called, I call them car break-ins, but now we call them bipping.
Mhm. Mhm.
Talk about how, from your perspective, property crimes have changed and how it seems to be a lot harder to deal with it today than in the past. Or am I wrong? What's your view?
Well, I think the idea behind the report, frankly, comes out of the acceleration in property crime that you saw there in the chart in 2023. So I think the property crime numbers have greater influence on the public perception of safety in Oakland.
Hmm.
It's less so violent crime. It's when you're seeing in the news or you're in the city itself and you see broken glass or you see bipping occur, when you're walking or biking or driving around the city itself. So I think that run up from 2020 to 2023 is really the cause for concern. And I think and it's right for the police department to focus on violent crime, right? Those are the most important crimes in the city. Those are the ones you want to be reducing. But the connection back then to the staffing level, I think, is a key one, and one we do make later in the report, where if OPD is out investigating and attempting to solve and focusing their time on violent crimes, this now very high level of property crimes in the city is not necessarily being investigated to the degree it should be. And when it is, you also had a district attorney's office in this period that wasn't necessarily charging for some of those crimes, right? So when we were out doing interviews as part of this project with OPD, that combination of staffing and then lack of consequences made Oakland, and I don't know if this is how criminals are thinking, right? But it made Oakland an attractive place, right? If you're someone that's deciding, I'm going to go commit retail theft, that's maybe not a spur of the moment decision. And whether you're in Oakland or somewhere else, I think it became pretty clear that if you did commit a crime in Oakland, the chances of getting caught were relatively low given the
Yeah.
staffing challenges.
Now, let's talk about that for a second because I saw briefly a news report, not focused on Oakland specifically, but a woman and her husband based in San Diego were arrested for having this network of individuals in different cities do these retail crimes. And I kept waiting for them to mention Oakland, and they didn't. But I thought, you know what? Oakland has to be somewhere, if not in their bailiwick of cities, then somebody else's who had done something similar. How much of this crime do you think was crime tourism, as some have called it?
Yeah, that I think is tough to really answer, right? I think that one of the issues with crime data generally is that it's all based on reports, right? So it's very difficult to know. We're probably missing a whole slew of criminal activities that were never reported, right? Because you just assume police wouldn't respond or wouldn't respond fast enough to make a difference. I do think there was likely some uptick in that, or at least waves of property crime being committed by the same individuals or groups of individuals. And I do think that's part of the downtick you saw in 2024 was that OPD was able to identify those individuals or those groups and target them. And I think that I think has been one of the key shifts in 2024 is just a greater target on property crime and theft rings that are organized in a way where you can kind of go after the individuals or groups and make a big difference in the actual numbers because you have a single person or single group responsible for 20, 30, 50 of those crimes on that chart.
Something else notable related to the chart that you put out in the report is that in 2024, March 2024, four of Oakland's largest employees, Blue Shield of California, Clorox, Kaiser Permanente, and Pacific Gas and Electric, announced a collaborative $10 million investment in public safety in Oakland. The investment included the creation of Uptown Downtown Safe Zone in partnership with OPD that will improve visible security in downtown areas. Specifically, the funding supports overtime pay, 8 off-duty officers and 1 sergeant on weekdays from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then, of course, expanded safety services through the Oakland Uptown Downtown Community Benefit District, including growth of the Ambassador Program from 25 to 55 full-time equivalent positions, offering an on-demand safety escorts to and from local destinations, and expansion of the downtown camera surveillance system for better coordination of OPD. With a renewed focus on public safety in the downtown commercial area, the organization writes, Oakland's Area 1, which includes the downtown area in West Oakland, produced a significant year-over-year reduction in property crime, a 40% reduction based on weekly crime data reported by OPD, and a 23% decrease in violent crime from 2023 to 2024. And what leads me to this question. I mean, it's quite obvious that the program worked, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I worked for the city of Oakland, first as an intern, right out of Cal in 1987 through 89, and then later as economic advisor Oakland Mayor Hugh Harris from 95 to 99, and then of course tried to bring the Super Bowl here, we had redevelopment. We had tax increment financing. And our business improvement districts were comparatively year over year well funded. This is a one-off program. Was there any discussion of trying to make this, more than 1 year by bringing back tax increment financing, which now can be used? For example, there's several types of legislation.
Mm-hmm. That was not specifically mentioned in the report, but I do think the idea that businesses are investing in public safety, I think, is an important one, but one that, because it says that they care, right? They want
Sure.
to be there, right?
Right.
They want Oakland to be safe. But I think the idea that we should expect our businesses to pay for what I think is generally thought of as a city service, policing, right, in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think and one of the recommendations in the report does call for dedicated funding sources. We don't talk to tax increment financing in particular, but the idea that you could make safety investments in the downtown and expect to see some return from them is one that we are making, right? That's a clear argument of the report, that investments in safety have a positive ROI. So you could very easily see an enhanced infrastructure financing district being created in the downtown. You make various public investments and placemaking investments, create safety, create value and property values, and you can bond off of that to have multiplying effects. So I do think that type of idea is a good one, right? And again, it's the entire thesis of this report is invest in police, invest in public safety. You get positive ROI for the city from a budget perspective. So you're right on, right? That's there's a way to create money there.
Yeah, and going forward through the study, which by the way is chock-a-block full of great information observations. The organization writes many cities, and let me switch back to here so you can see. Sorry about that. Many cities across the U.S. have a program that aims to reduce gun violence by targeting individuals involved in gangs and providing them with life coaching, case management, and focused strategy to deter future gun violence. Research has shown that gun crimes generally involve repeat offenders with a relatively small subset of the population, and that a targeted approach toward deterrence can have significant impacts on rates of violent crime. In Oakland, this strategy called ceasefire was implemented in 2012. The model was a proven success, reducing gun crimes, with a study from Northeastern University concluding that ceasefire was associated with a 31% reduction in homicides in Oakland when controlling for other factors. But then you write, after an audit found that the program's resources had waned during the pandemic, OPD made multiple changes in partnership with the Department of Violence Prevention, including reinstituting shooting review meetings and establishing more formal collaboration between OPD, DVP, the county's probation department, and local service providers to more fully commit the ceasefire program. And you go on and you finally conclude that the successes were notable, but it's also clear from the surveying effort undertaken by FM3 Research the current level of crime in Oakland, even after the improvements were noted, is unsustainable for the city's residents and its economy going forward. when asked whether they were feeling safer in Oakland, when compared to a few years ago, only 11% of Oakland voters and 6% of Oakland voters in surrounding cities say they felt safer, as shown below. And that also begs the question. It seems like once we have the funding to keep a program in place, things improve, but then the funding drops off and it's like, oh, we're back to the same problem, right?
Yeah, and that's why we come back to this cycle, right? That the funding for public safety, given the structure of the city, right? A lot of the funding for public safety comes directly from the general fund. So when the economy dips, public safety funding also generally dips. So it's hard for the city to really sustain any success, which you showed in those previous charts. We had years where we go up, we go down, but in other cities that we study, the numbers, particularly on property crime, you can see a very clear downward trend, where in Oakland, it's very hard to identify that over the past 20, 30 years or so. So on ceasefire, though, right, where we have these programs that we know are successful, we do call for additional funding there. And I think that's a key partnership between OPD and the city itself, the Department of Violence Prevention. So it uses police resources, uses case management resources. And again, it's, if you can prevent the crime from happening in the first place, that is the low-hanging fruit here. It's very difficult to do, right? But that'll drive your numbers down. It creates more resources for police that don't have to investigate the crime. And that's the North Star here, is preventing the crime in the first place. So programs like ceasefire that create deterrence models, create violence interruption models, those are the things the city should really be doubling down on.
And then let's talk about other cities. I'm happy to refer to the chart if you wish to do so, but I want to just hear your view. What did you find with respect to how Oakland compares to other cities and what those cities were?
Yeah, so I think a couple things, right? The number of police officers, again, is key. When you look at cities that have reduced property crime in particular, you can really go back 20, 15 years, look at where the inflection point is on property crime numbers, and you can see an escalation in the number of officers, right? That's more difficult now in the last couple of years. It's harder to recruit police officers across the country, not just true in Oakland, right? So police officer numbers are down countrywide.
Why is that?
I think just with the defund the police movement, you've got more people, particularly in California, that don't necessarily see policing as it's a very difficult profession that maybe doesn't necessarily, pay you, excellent wages, right? They pay very good wages, but I think for a profession that puts you in danger, maybe the community doesn't necessarily like you in a place like Oakland. It's a tough sell for many folks. So I do think that police numbers are number one. Number two, just the use of technology, right? And even in a place like Oakland, where you maybe can't staff up the police force, you can do more in terms of license plate readers, cameras. Yes, there are privacy concerns around all of that, but we do look across the country, and camera networks are used by police departments almost everywhere to deploy resources effectively to follow criminals in real time, right? So I do think there's something there as well. So it's really, I think the staffing piece, the technology piece, and then there's just this piece on governance and oversight in the city. And we want to be careful here that the rider scandal was a massive scandal, right? And there are things that happen within OPD that are indefensible, that have happened that happened 20 years ago and happened even since then, right? So governance oversight is clearly needed, but I think it's fair to question now, after 20 years of court oversight, are the costs to the city, just in dollar terms and administrative terms, what is the city getting from that oversight today? And could the city be advocating for removal of that oversight and kind of taking some of that back in-house? So I think it's the three things we identified. It's the staffing, technology, and then just looking at the kind of constraints around the department that exist.
Let me ask you, do you think the Oakland Police Department is fundamentally better than it was during the rider scandal?
That we didn't study. I don't feel comfortable answering that. I think the answer is yes. I think you can see from the negotiated settlement agreement that of the tasks, only 3 remain of the 50 some odd tasks that OPD agreed to actually do. So I think there have been fundamental reforms that have taken place. I think the question, though, should be, has the trust in OPD changed from that time. And I think it probably still is, yes, but is the community trust level there to really allow community policing to happen in a great way, to allow crimes to be reported and then investigated with the community's assistance? Because as you look around the country, again, the places that have reduced crime levels, they do it in a very community kind of even block level approach, where they're piloting things with community leaders, with church leaders, with nonprofit leaders, foundation leaders, to really get out there into the community to build trust, create youth programs, right? Create these diversion programs. And then when crime does occur, you've got an entire network to help you as an investigator figure out, how you find that perpetrator, right? So I think that's maybe a key missing point in Oakland, is how do you build that police department community trust back? I think it's better than it was 20 years ago. I think it has to be, given the reforms that have changed, but I'm still not sure that it's at the point it needs to be to make significant change going forward.
I'm curious to know if any consideration was made. I didn't see that. I may have skipped over it with respect to the homeless community, because I had a number of discussions. I had Derek Sue on yesterday for about an hour, a very searing conversation. But what I learned was that what would normally be reports to the police made by homeless people were actually blocked. But by Derek alleges Joe DeVries. I don't want to get deep into that, but it is a major problem. And what I'm saying is that if we had perfect information with respect to the homeless community and policing, how do you think these numbers would change? Because we have a large homeless population, 10,000 by some estimates,
Yeah, no, I think the issues are linked to a certain extent. I think I'll answer that through some of the polling and the perception work that we did, right? Because I think when you look just at the reported crime rates in the city, they have gone down substantially. But when you drive around, you walk around certain parts of Oakland, the homeless issue remains. And I think the public perception is one of, when you're seeing the homelessness issue, the unsheltered homelessness issue, right? You're feeling like, the city is not taking control of that issue. Right. And there's whether it's the chaos that comes from that, whether you feel like the city isn't necessarily clean, I think people conflate that issue with the issue of crime a little bit, and their feeling of safety. On the extent of reported crimes, again, it's very difficult with the data that we have to say what is in and what is out. So I don't want to hypothesize on how the numbers would change, but I do think the city can do more in both of these areas, right? And I think that would, on the polling front and on the public perception front, do a lot to help people feel comfortable spending their money in Oakland, right? Because when we look at the polling data, half of Oakland residents say they leave the city to go shopping because they feel safer elsewhere. Like that's a mind-boggling number, right? 3/4 of people are saying they're patronizing Oakland businesses less because they don't feel safe, right? Again, that's a very significant number. People are saying they don't want to come to work because they don't necessarily feel safe in downtown Oakland. So I think all of the homelessness issue and the public safety issue, they do go together. And I think that at the end of the day, it's about making policy choices and making investments in the thing that will get people back into Oakland and spending their money and creating economic activity.
What you just said reminds me of a survey that I conducted when I was a columnist with Montclair between 93 and 96. This was in 94. Sent out a full page survey, whole op-ed page, which was unprecedented for them, I was told at the time. We received 600 pieces of mail, snail mail back, which is a record. What I learned in crunching the numbers for my report for our readers was that, among other things, even then, Oaklanders went outside Oakland and complained there were no shops, the same thing. So my question is, how much of that response is also a function of the fact that we don't have, and we haven't had for a long, long time, a healthy downtown retail corridor? And yet we tried to build one. We had Michael Spear sadly died in a helicopter crash in 1991. He was representing the Rouse Company, 2 million square foot shopping center. Then, of course, Dave Alexander comes through with basically a second shot, and that didn't go through for a host of reasons I can basically write a book about. I can go on and on and on. Yet the bottom line is we don't have it, right? How much is
And
that a factor?
I think it's a big factor. So I do think, when we look at the funding sources for the city's general fund, the sales tax is actually a relatively small piece of that. And that's because Oakland doesn't have, well, it doesn't have the big box stores, I think, is the big driver, but it doesn't have the massive retail corridors you would think a large city of Oakland size would have. So I do think that's a big piece. That's a big piece of the fiscal story. I do think, though, when we ask people, why are you not shopping in Oakland? The idea that you don't feel safe is actually above the fact that, oh, my favorite small businesses have closed, or the shops that I want are actually not here. So I do think the idea of clean and safe is really just like a baseline thing that every city has to have to drive economic activity. Because if you don't feel that way when you're there, you're less likely to go, less likely to spend money, less likely to generate sales tax, right? It becomes this, I hesitate to say doom loop because I don't think that's what it is, but it does become this cycle of reduced spending, and then businesses close down, and then spending, and there's further reductions in spending. So it's tough, right? And then the question becomes, like, how does Oakland really generate that? And I would go back to, again, you've got to draw in that private investment. You really have to prove out the fact that this is a safe environment, first of all, and then you can build the ROI on top of that.
And also, it occurs to me that we talk about shopping, but is it fair to conclude that shopping also includes eating?
Yeah. So some of the questions we asked were about dining, shopping, entertainment, right? All of those things are down in the surveying effort that we administered across the city in the East Bay, which makes sense. I mean, if you did the same survey in San Francisco, I think those things would be down as well. But where I think the difference is here is that when you ask why, it's less about remote work or I just don't go there anymore, and it's much more of I don't feel safe doing that.
Yeah. There's a neat chart here I'll show just because, among other things, it's colorful. Looks like someone came up with a great idea for spaghetti. But the actual title for it is Violent Crime per 100,000 Residents for 14 mid-sized cities, U.S. population 300,000 to 650,000 from 2005 to 2024. So what are you all communicating with this chart?
Well, yeah, so we wanted to look at other mid-sized cities comparable in population size to Oakland. So there are 14 cities here. Oakland is in that teal green. Again, you can kind of see that there are ups, there are downs, but I think the main piece here, on a violent crime perspective, Oakland is very close to cities like Baltimore, like Detroit, like Memphis, which perception-wise, I think if you read any of those rankings, those are usually at the bottom of the list in terms of safest cities in the U.S. Then you look at the other highlighted cities.
Look at Detroit, though.
And Detroit has come down, right? Yeah. So Detroit still has a very elevated number, but Detroit has come down over time, right? And you can say that also true though about Atlanta, right? I think if you look at the beginning of this chart, Atlanta and Oakland start in nearly the same place, and Atlanta over the course of now 20 years has a pretty stark downward trajectory in its violent crime rates. So what we then asked, like places like Atlanta, places like Cincinnati, even Pittsburgh, like what have they done? And all three of those places had concerted police recruitment efforts, and Atlanta and Pittsburgh had pretty wide deployment of camera networks to help in the investigation and solving of violent crimes. And I think in Cincinnati is an interesting case because Cincinnati, like Oakland 20 years ago, went under a federal consent decree, had federal oversight, and really made an effort to do a kind of community policing partnership that I'm not sure has really ever been really explored in the city of Oakland. And while Cincinnati did employ more police officers and they redid their beat map, they did many things that allowed police officers to interact with the community in a better way. It does show in this chart, right? The numbers are going down, right? And I think it's also a good corollary city of where police trust was exceptionally low 20 years ago, and they have rebuilt that now over time to a place where crime rates in Cincinnati are grouped into the bottom of this list. And I think if you go to the property crime one on the next page, I think Cincinnati is also near the bottom there as well.
What's interesting for this chart is that all the other cities, particularly Memphis and Detroit, um, have come down dramatically. But if I were to chart a line with respect for Oakland from here to here, the line goes up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for Memphis, it goes down.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for Detroit, it goes down. And for Atlanta, it goes down. As we talked about the other cities going down. And Baltimore is going down, but Oakland, it's the only city that appears to have, on average, an upward tick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, I have my own thoughts I want to share about that, but I want to hear you. Why that difference from your point of view?
I think it's, when you look at crime trends, I think there's just so many different things that play into it. I think that an easy answer would be that Oakland hasn't made the sustained investments in public safety over the last decade that some of these other places have. But I'd hesitate. Like, a lot of this plays into gang activity, drug activity, right? I mean, there's a lot of different factors here. I do think, though, that these other communities, particularly look 2 decades ago, all of them really are, maybe we're in the place that Oakland is in today, right? Where crime has been identified as the key, as the linchpin issue. And they brought various stakeholders together to really ask what could be done about it. Whereas in Oakland, I think that's happened, right? But it hasn't happened in a sustained sort of way to really make a difference in these numbers. And I think that's maybe the key challenge. And if you look down at the bottom of the report, we have police staffing levels. We talk about investment in OPD, right? Those things go up and down as the economy goes up and down. And I think other cities, just their structure in terms of funding public safety activities is more stable than the city of Oakland.
Wow, and the property crimes, I look at this dramatic difference.
Yeah, and property crime. This I think is the key issue for the city is getting property crime under control. Again, a big drop in 2024, but it's really just Oakland and Memphis stand alone of these mid-sized cities, and it's a pretty clear trend. Like, the other part of this is clear trend actually upward again in Oakland over the past decade or so, whereas in almost every other city, if you look across this graph, the trend is pretty. It's not sharply down, but trending downward for almost every other mid-sized city in America.
Hey, I'm curious, how much of this reflects business disinvestment? Let me explain where I'm going with this. I covered the NFL draft in Detroit on site for our 19th straight year at the time of being credentialed. And I had lunch with my longtime friend, Kofi Bonner. And Kofi was not only my classmate at Cal in grad school, we both graduated in 87, but now he's CEO of Bedrock. And Bedrock is the organization that is owned by Dan Gilbert, and Dan Gilbert owns the Cavaliers and Rocket Mortgage. And so we were talking, and Kofi told me something I have never forgot. He said that when you first took the job with Dan, Dan said, Kofi, I want an explosion in Detroit. My theory is that if we have all of these different developments going off, completing at roughly the same time, within the same space time, it's like 2 years, then the public will realize, or really 5 years, the public will realize a tacit difference in change in Detroit. Jeff, I've been to Detroit twice. The first time was for the 2006 Super Bowl. The downtown, they did a great job preparing it, but around it just immediately, wow, places you wouldn't want to be. I know because I got lost. Today, or I should say more appropriately, last year for the draft, wow, what a difference. Everywhere you look, new condominiums, buildings, apartments, retail, downtown, the Maximus Center, everything else, completely transformed. So how much of Oakland's problem is really a child of business disinvestment, or maybe that, chicken and egg relationship?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a chicken and egg relationship. I think what we would say is that to get greater levels of business investment. You've got to create that feeling of public safety so that whether you're investing in a new building, residential or office, or you're a company coming in, taking up space, you feel like you are safe in that place, right? So I think that to us is that's the well, I guess that's the egg portion of it, maybe, right? But I do think Oakland downtown in particular was having a moment pre-pandemic. You looked at how expensive San Francisco was. We had the downtown, all the downtown general planning efforts, specific planning efforts happening in Oakland. You saw all sorts of residential mid-rises and high-rises going up kind of in that downtown periphery. So I think that was there, right? And now you're back in this moment where some of those businesses have vacated, right? Some of those residential buildings are not 100% leased up, right? The idea of downtown in particular across our region, right? This is true in San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, right? It's just fewer people in downtowns. They're not as attractive as they once were. It doesn't mean that's always going to be the case. But I do think when you look at Detroit, and I haven't been there in the last decade, but I know they have new stadiums, right? Mm-hmm. They have all these companies that are now working together to make investments with the philanthropic community, right? So there's place-based investments going on. There's investments in the community. There's investments in job training, right? There's an ecosystem of creating the economic opportunity that I think it does exist in pockets in Oakland, but doesn't exist at scale.
If I can add to that with respect to Detroit, one thing that Bedrock did, working with Rocket Mortgage used to have its offices dispersed around the region. Well, they all concentrated in downtown in this, I keep calling it Maximus, that's not the name, but it's a wonderful steel and glass building that also served as the headquarters for NFL media for the NFL draft. Mm-hmm. But everything around it brand new. I can't say how many times I was just completely impressed with Detroit's turnaround. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And a lot of that was, their intent to really concentrate activity. There's that conversation again, right? Mm-hmm. In the downtown, revitalize the downtown. And I told Mayor Lee that there's our blueprint.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, Detroit, you can go to their websites and they tout all of the progress they've made on public safety too. Yeah. They do have a public-private partnership with local businesses that want to install cameras. They put a giant green light on the camera so everybody knows that space is being monitored. You can feel safe being there at night, daytime, whenever it might be. They've done a lot in terms of how the philanthropic community has supported different violence prevention efforts, different crime prevention efforts. The companies are all on the same page there. So I think you're right. That's a good blueprint. When we identified it, the crime levels are still relatively high, but you can see here's a place that has made significant progress in the last few decades.
Yeah. And how much time do you have, by the way? Because I know it's 5:46, and so
I've got until the top of the hour, 12 more minutes or so. I do have a 10 after 3:10. So
okay, I want to ask you a fun question related to this. I think it's fun. How much of this is related to the loss of our sports organizations? Here's where I'm going with this. We've had a problem filling hotels. Hotels are dying in Oakland. It's gone down. My contention is that much of the economic development structure in Oakland, which leads to people gathering and how we relate in those spaces and live, and also crimes that committed or not, has to do with people coming in from out of town to see either the A's, the Raiders, or the Warriors historically. Mm-hmm. And in the internet age, and I actually tracked this, as we lost our sports teams, the search for Oakland went down. Yeah. And actually, we haven't had any tentpole events to sell the city, right? How much of that is a factor in our persistently high crime rate? It's an indirect factor, of course.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the homelessness and everything else is another factor. But how much of that, because we never talked about it, yet it happens. And it's business, right? It's a business activity.
It's a business activity. I'd venture to guess there are bigger impacts on the fiscal side, whether it's the hotel tax, sales tax, whatever it might be. Oakland had crime troubles in 1992 when we had those sports teams. So I think that's that's a piece of it. Generally we would say that the number of people coming in from outside of the state or region to see those things is relatively small in the grand scheme of things. But I do think
But here's my question, though. I have to ask you: is it small because, for example, I tried to bring the Super Bowl here. Had I done that, that would have been, I estimated, at least $60 million for our nonprofits in Oakland alone. The way I designed our host committee approach. Okay, we haven't had efforts like that. The last time we did was 1992. We had Celebration Oakland, and now in an era of sports tourism, we have no sports organizations to use on a great level to even play in the industry. All right. So what I'm saying is there's a relationship here that, for reasons that boggle my mind, we haven't explored. And yet I'm here in Atlanta for my mom because I'm caregiving for her. And sports is king here. They get an economic development of sports. I can go on and on and on. Detroit, the cities you have on your chart.
Yeah, there is a civic pride aspect to all of this, right? Where the sports teams can create that aspect of civic pride that then, it injects that corporate investment, that philanthropic investment, creates that.
But also the tourism, because
it creates in the tourism, and it creates also a place, right? In Detroit, Atlanta, right? They're creating places for people to go, and they focus on safety in those places, I would assume, because they want people to go there and spend their money, right? So I do think that's, those types of like foundational institutions leaving Oakland haven't helped, right? But I would say Oakland, there are some foundational employers that remain in the city, right? And PG&E is relatively new there, right? Kaiser still has a big presence there. That there are other big players in the city of Oakland. So there are still people coming in and out, right? And I think those are the assets that the city needs to really have its eye on and protect, right? Because it's not guaranteed that companies will have headquarters in the city or have an office in the city, right? So,
and I go a step further, separate from sports. When I worked for Elihu, Oakland Councilman John Russo, developer Phil Tagami, Kobe Bonner, and myself, we all fashioned a plan where Oakland annually went to the International Council of Shopping Center Spring Convention, and we set it up. We were selling Oakland. We stopped doing that a long time ago, and yet we had some scores. I brought Forest City to Oakland. Jerry stole Forest City from me to create housing. I was doing retail. I had Stern. I co-called Robert A.M. Stern, had him send Paul Whalen to team with him. I had the whole thing planned out and endeavored, and then Jerry came and took the whole thing out from under me. And so what about the fact that Oakland simply doesn't do economic development and go out and get businesses on the regular like it used to? I got Cirque du Soleil in 1996. I stole them from San Francisco. Fact.
And I do think what is the economic equation, though, or marketing point across the entire region? I would almost ask, right? I think for a long time I think Oakland lived a little bit off of San Francisco is so expensive.
Right.
We have space here, come do business in the city of Oakland. Now that San Francisco vacancy rates are higher, rents are a little bit cheaper, I think the recovery path for Oakland is a little bit more difficult because it is, in theory, competing with San Francisco. So I do think whether it's the sports or the safety, right, you've got to create something that people care about, want to invest in. And I do think that's, again, the baseline for that is you've got to have something that is clean and safe. And then, you have something to sell, right? So I think that it's tough in Oakland, right? I know the chamber does a lot of great work. There is economic development work happening within the city, but a lot of that is very much focused on just how do we get to a level where we can begin to sell things, right, that are sellable. Right? Because I think today the national narrative, even the regional narrative around Oakland, is that it's not a great place to do business, not an investable place, not a place that people necessarily want to come to, and that shouldn't be true, right? I'm as an East Bay resident myself. Oakland is a great city, right? You could argue it has some better qualities than San Francisco, right?
Yes.
Everyone's saying it has better restaurants right now, right? So how do you take that, sell that, right, and then build the city's reputation over time, because that's what has to happen, right? You can't,
Absolutely.
if you go across the country and say Oakland, you can't automatically think, oh, you lost all your teams and it's not safe. Like that's not the messaging you want. And I think
No, and yet that's the narrative.
but I think that is the messaging. Like if you're in Atlanta and you're asking people, what do you know about Oakland? I think that's probably what they would tell you.
Yeah, and it's even a problem. I remember when I asked Commissioner Goodell about the work of AESCG, and instead of saying I'm aware of it, the first thing he did was laugh. He laughed on camera. And so I think you're right. We have a lot of work to do. But in closing, out of respect for your time, first of all, congratulations on doing this.
Thank you.
It's a great work, and it's should spur a lot of work and and response in a positive way in terms of getting the city to move forward. What are the next steps with this?
So we're, this is a very data-driven report. We're also a public policy organization. So what we do next is we're going to be going to city council. We'll be having meetings with various leaders across the city to ensure that folks know the data in the report, they know the recommendations. And then I don't think the solution comes in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, right? This is a very concerted effort to bring the business community in the city together with city leadership, with law enforcement agencies to really say we need to make a difference. And I think there are some actionable recommendations here, and we'll be driving those forward with the city council, hopefully in the next 12 to 24 months. But I do think this is a problem that is years and decades in the making. It's going to be years and decades in the solving, right? But I think it becomes, the purpose of all of this is really just to shine a brighter light on it and to ensure that it really is prioritized in the city's budgeting going forward.
And I think you guys have done a fantastic job at that, to say the least. And I want to congratulate you.
Thank you.
On the work that you've done and the work that you're going to do moving forward. And tell Jim I said hi, unless he's watching. Hey, Jim.
Will do.
Hey, Jim, we need to talk about Howard Terminal one day.
Yeah, there's your opportunity right there.
Yeah, there you go. And Court says sports isn't just a business in a city or region, but in a sense, the sports team is itself an advertisement of the city. People come to see the team, and I think it's pretty cool here. I'll come again. I couldn't agree more. All right, and I do think if we got that going, it would have a positive effect in terms of reduction in crime. But folks, can they go to your website and get it? I was going to send them to zenireport.com and they can get it there.
Yeah, we're at bayareaeconomy.org, should be the first thing on the website. Also at bayareacouncil.org, you can find it there as well.
bayareaeconomy.org. And there, right?
Perfect.
All right, cool. Hey, stick around in the background. You have to remove a muscle, Jeff. Hey, everybody, thank you for viewing and your questions and comments and everything else. More to come. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube. Bookmark ZennyReport.com and OaklandNewsOnline.com. That ends this stream. Thanks. How was that, Jeff?